Hey guys, welcome back to another Coding Flamingo video. So in the last few videos we have been deploying our static web application into AWS, Azure, and GitHub. So now let's look at the different cloud providers and which one is the best option for our site. So let's start with pricing. So pricing, GitHub Pages is free, so there's that going for it. So I guess that GitHub wins that category. But then let's look at our other options. So then we have storage. So Amazon S3 charges you 2 cents and 3/10 of a cent per gigabyte, and Azure charges you, and the one we're using is 1 cent 0.84. So in this one, Azure is a little bit cheaper. Obviously, if it ends up being a lot of gigabytes, it actually makes sense to go one against the other. So I guess Azure has a slight edge on that. And then we also deployed our application to some compute. So in Azure we use the app service plan, we use the S1, which is 10 cents an hour, which ends up being around $72 a month. And then in EC2 we deploy to a T3A medium, which ends up being around $40 a month. So in this one, AWS is way cheaper, and you actually get a little bit more compute. So you get actually 2 vCPUs instead of 1.75, and you get 4 gigs of RAM instead of 1.75. So in compute, it's way cheaper to go with the AWS route, but for a static website, as we have seen, it doesn't really make sense. You would have to be downloading a lot of gigabytes to get to those prices in blob storage, which at that point you probably would have to upgrade your instances to match that demand. So that covers the pricing. So I guess if I do this, they're sorted by price. So you have GitHub, it's not even in the page, that's how good they are. Then you have Azure Blob Storage, then S3, then EC2, and then App Services. And the ease of use, they have all been fairly easy to use. The only thing you could argue is if we look at our actual sites. So here are the 5 sites in all the different places. So these are the 2 Azure sites. The 5 icon was able to replicate no problem. Same with the AWS blob storage. Same with the AWS S3 bucket. In GitHub and in the Elastic Bean, it kind of didn't copy there. And another thing to notice is the 2 Azure sites and the GitHub site have HTTPS by default. I didn't have to do anything extra. I'm deploying the same with the other ones, and these ones they do not. So you have to do a little more work to get an SSL certificate. So that's something to keep in mind. If you're just doing a quick application, it looks way better to just have the little lock in there. So that covers kind of like ease of use of deployment. We deployed both of the compute ones were deployed from Visual Studio, no problem, and all the other 3 were deployed from GitHub using a GitHub action, and it was fairly straightforward to set up, so I would make them equally as easy to deploy. So then let's look at performance. So now I'm going to open a new incognito tab, and in here we're going to test the performance of a single call to each one of them. Some caveats that I want to mention before we go through the data. The first one is this was based on 1 run of each, so usually you should do it hopefully from different machines, different places, and everything. This was all done for my dev machine and just 1 run, so maybe there could have been a network glitch or something in that second or something that might affect a little bit. So if you want true results, you should do an average of different places and stuff. Another thing is the Amazon resources, they're in the Oregon region, and the Azure resources are in the Washington region. and I'm in Seattle, so they're fairly around the same distance from here. So just keep that in mind that those are the closest data centers that I could put for my area. GitHub doesn't allow me to select anything, so that's something. So it took 3.595 seconds to go to the Azure Websites one. So now let's try the Azure Storage one. A little bit faster. Now let's try GitHub. And it's way faster, like half the speed. So now let's try S3 bucket. And it's on par with GitHub. There is a few milliseconds difference, so technically GitHub is still faster. And then last but not least, the Elastic Bean. And I didn't press F12, so I'm gonna have to close this so there's no cache and do it again. So both AWS services took 1.79 and 1.78. GitHub was the faster with 1.5 something, and then the two Azure services took almost 4 seconds. So speed is definitely, GitHub is definitely the winner there, and then AWS is a very close second, and Azure is a far third place. So that covers a single request. No one is going to these sites. They're not popular sites. So that takes care of that. So now the next thing, it's multiple requests at the same time. So for that, we're going to use Gatling, or however it's called. I'm probably butchering the name. It's an open source tool that lets you kind of set up your own testing and to check the requests. So I went ahead and created the testing for all of them, and all of them have the same scenario name. The same scenario. So you have two requests. The first one just calls home, which that one, as you saw, downloads all the Blazor WebAssembly stuff. The second one calls weather.json, which is the second thing you get with the fetch data API. So that takes care of both calls that you can do to this site. And then I do 500 users at the same time and 100 users at the same time. The reason I do this is in some of my testing, 500 users was too much for some of the sites, so then you start seeing some throttling. So then with the 100 we get to see the real performance, and then with the other one you see how it starts to throttle. So I went ahead and ran the testing, and here we can see that AWS was the fastest overall. We can see that it was faster with 500 users and with 100 users. We can see then GitHub being a little bit slower, and then Azure being the slowest by far. So in here, if we take into account again cost, we have GitHub, which is free, and it's still a very comparable performance to AWS, so I think that would be a good option. Then we have AWS S3, which was a very cheap option with very good performance, actually one of our best performance. Elastic Bean is a little bit faster, but it's within the margin of noise. And then we have Azure. It has worse performance. Azure Storage was a little bit cheaper, So maybe you go for that. Maybe you are using Azure, you're used to Azure, so you use Azure. All of them have good performance. Azure had SSL by default, which made it easy, same as the GitHub pages. If I had to do this, and probably where I'm going to host the Coding Flamingo page will be GitHub pages, just because it's free. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.